This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by Logarithm. There's a lot riding on the shoulders of cybersecurity operations teams, a company's reputation, a hospital's health records, an entire community's drinking water, the weight of protecting the world. It's a load Logarithm helps lighten. Logarithm's engineers and analysts have been on the front lines of many of the world's most significant attempted cyberattacks. As allies in the fight, Logarithm helps busy and lean security operations teams close gaps in manpower, increase knowledge of new attacks and techniques, and save the day, day after day. Learn more at logarithm.com. Hacktivism and other cyber attacks continue against Russian targets, but some may have gone too far. An initial access broker in the criminal-to-criminal market, BlackMatter may be working with BlackCat. CISA offers a warning and advice to SATCOM operators. NIST offers some guidance on industrial control system security. Johannes Ullrich reminds us to patch our backup tools. Our guest is Armando Saey from MISI with sights on maritime port security. And Rear Admiral Mehoff, call your office. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Friday, March 18th, 2022. Anonymous has resumed or continued its campaign of defacement against Russian networked closed-circuit cameras, rigging them to display such messages as Putin is killing children, 352 Ukraine civilians dead, Slava Ukraini. Vice reports. Russian government websites have also come under attack. In an unusual announcement, Russia's Ministry of Digital Development and Communications said the attacks were unprecedented. They appear, from the account offered by the Washington Post, to be a mixture of distributed denial of service attacks and website defacements. A statement from the ministry, apparently addressing the DDoS attacks, said, quote, "We are recording unprecedented attacks on the websites of government authorities. If their capacity at peak times reached 500 gigabytes earlier, it is now up to 1 terabyte. That is 2 to 3 times more powerful than the most serious incidents of this type previously recorded." End quote. Among the website defacements was one affecting the Russian Emergency Situations Ministry website, whose content was changed. The ministry's hotline number was replaced by a heading, "Come back from Ukraine alive," followed by a number Russian soldiers could call for assistance should they be interested in desertion. It's not always clear which actions are those of hacktivists and which are conducted by Ukrainian digital services. Wired gives high marks to Kyiv's Ministry of Digital Transformation in what amounts to a mash note to a government agency run by tech-savvy freaks who've proven themselves to be a formidable war machine. The closeness of Ukraine's cyber operators to NATO hasn't escaped Russian notice either. Moscow's ambassador to Estonia, where NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence is located, sees more evidence of Western plotting and blackmail, Bleeping Computer reports. Ambassador Lipayev explained to TASS in an interview today, quote, "Our suspicions on this score have turned out to be correct. This first step will certainly entail others pursuing the aim of converting Ukraine into a stronghold for political, economic, ideological, and military blackmail of Russia." End quote. Cloud security firm Snyk has found malicious code in the NPM open-source ecosystem that seems motivated by a hacktivist determination to strike Russia and its increasingly shy junior partner Belarus. Snyk explained, quote, "On March 15, 2022, users of the popular Vue.js front-end JavaScript framework started experiencing what can only be described as a supply chain attack impacting the NPM ecosystem. This was the result of the nested dependencies Node-IPC and Peace Not War being sabotaged as an act of protest by the maintainer of the Node-IPC package. This security incident involves destructive acts of corrupting files on disk by one maintainer and their attempts to hide and restate that deliberate sabotage in different forms. While this is an attack with protest-driven motivations, it highlights a larger issue facing the software supply chain. The transitive dependencies in your code can have a huge impact on your security." End quote. Hacker News explains that Node IPC is a prominent node module used for local and remote inter-process communication with support for Linux, macOS, and Windows. It has over 1.1 million weekly downloads. An NPM manager wrote and published an NPM module that he described as follows, quote, "This code serves as a non-destructive example of why controlling your node modules is important. It also serves as a non-violent protest against Russia's aggression that threatens the world right now. This module will add a message of peace on your users' desktops, and it will only do it if it does not already exist, just to be polite." End quote. At the very least, Snyk says this particular form of protest calls into question the trustworthiness of the maintainer, who goes by the hacker name Rear Evangelist, and his other contributions. Snyk concludes, quote, "Snyk stands with Ukraine, and we've proactively acted to support the Ukrainian people during the ongoing crisis with donations and free service to developers worldwide, as well as taking action to cease business in Russia and Belarus. That said, intentional abuse such as this undermines the global open-source community and requires us to flag impacted versions of Node IPC as security vulnerabilities." End quote. Google's Threat Analysis Group is investigating a financially motivated, that is, criminal, initial access broker its researchers are calling Exotic Lily. The group is working with the gang known variously as Fin12 and Wizard Spider, best known as proprietors of the Conti ransomware. Exotic Lily has exploited a vulnerability in Microsoft MS-HTML. Security researchers with Cisco Talos describe a suggestive convergence between BlackCat malware and the BlackMatter DarkSide gang. BlackCat has poo-pooed other attempts to link them to BlackMatter and its DarkSide ancestor, denying that it's just a rebranding of BlackMatter and insisting that it's a new team made up of alumni from other ransomware-as-a-service groups. But in one respect, at least Talos seems to have the goods on them. BlackMatter was an early adopter of BlackCat. The researchers write, quote, "BlackCat seems to be a case of vertical business expansion. In essence, it's a way to control the upstream supply chain by making a service that is key to their business, the ransomware-as-a-service operator, better suited for their needs and adding another source of revenue. Vertical expansion is also a common business strategy when there is a lack of trust in the supply chain. There are several cases of vulnerabilities in ransomware encryption and even of backdoors that can explain a lack of trust in ransomware-as-a-service. One particular case mentioned by the BlackCat representative was a flaw in DarkSide BlackMatter ransomware, allowing victims to decrypt their files without paying the ransom. Victims used this vulnerability for several months, resulting in big losses for affiliates." End quote. CISA and the FBI have advised satellite communications operators to take a number of steps to increase the security of their systems. For immediate action, they recommend that operators take the following steps today: use secure methods for authentication, enforce principle of least privilege, review trust relationships, implement encryption, ensure robust patching and system configuration audits, monitor logs for suspicious activity, and ensure incident response, resilience, and continuity of operations plans are in place. It's familiar advice, but nonetheless valuable for having been offered before. Basic cyber hygiene is always a good idea. The alert doesn't explicitly mention the Russian threat to satellite systems, but as SecurityWeek points out, it's likely that the warning was prompted by the ongoing investigation of probable interference with Viasat service in Ukraine and parts of Eastern Europe. It's significant that the agencies recommend reading the recent annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community for what it has to say about state-sponsored threats to satellite systems. NIST has released SP 1800-10, Protecting Information and System Integrity in Industrial Control System Environments, Cybersecurity for the Manufacturing Sector. The document is noteworthy for communicating its advice by walking its audience through 11 attack scenarios that cover physical, network, and software supply chain avenues of approach. And finally, the UK's Defence and Home Secretaries, Ben Wallace and Priti Patel, respectively, separately entered Microsoft Teams meetings, which Mr. Wallace said had been properly set up, during which they believed initially that they were talking to Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. The Telegraph reports, while the person he was speaking with looked like Mr. Shmyhal and was sitting in front of a Ukrainian flag, the defense secretary grew suspicious when the person who looked like Shmyhal began asking about British naval deployments and Ukrainian intentions. Presumably, the real Prime Minister Shmyhal wouldn't need the UK to tell him what his government's intentions were. Mr. Wallace ended the call after 8 minutes and has ordered an investigation. Ms. Patel's experience was similar. The Guardian's account of the incidents considers them hoaxes, leaving open the question of whether Russian services were behind them, but it's equally severe about the security measures that made it possible for an imposter to get through to members of the cabinet. So, a question. Are phone pranks more or less credible when they arrive through business collaboration tools? If the calls were the work of Russian intelligence services, it represents something new. Who expected Moscow to call in and effectively identify themselves as IP freely? One would expect more. A call like that might convince Mo Sislak for a minute, but a cabinet minister? And now, a word from our sponsor, Recorded Future. Staying one step ahead of the rapidly evolving threat landscape requires a constant flow of daily intelligence. To stay up to date on everything happening in the world of cybersecurity, join over 50,000 other security professionals who subscribe to the Cyber Daily. With daily email updates on the latest cybersecurity news, top threat actors, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more, the Cyber Daily is the first thing security professionals check every morning. To learn more and subscribe for free, go to recordedfuture.com/cyber-daily. And we thank Recorded Future for sponsoring our show. Taking place next week in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, is the Maritime and Control Systems Cybersecurity Con, Hack the Port 22. The event is put on by MISI, the Maryland Innovation and Security Institute, and Dreamport in support of U.S. Cybercom and its mission partners. The event highlights the importance of securing our maritime ports. Armando Saey is director of Dreamport.
In 2020 and 2021, there were two maritime strategies, one for the Coast Guard and then a national cyber policy for maritime. What we discovered in communications with folks at CISA, Department of Homeland Security, and Coast Guard, actually the Pentagon as well, was not getting enough attention. If you look at the Iranian playbook, Cyber Command playbook that was released, it totally pointed out the fact that they were looking to do malicious cyber attacks at maritime ports to disable force projection of their adversaries, to disrupt supply chains. In the U.S. alone, or the world, like 90% of goods travel through some sort of maritime ports. I mean, they eventually make it onto rail systems and trucking systems, but it's transported overseas, through ships, and they get to various shores when we export goods. So you can disrupt entire global and domestic economies, regionally and nationally, by basically attacking a port. There's some reports that are saying there's been a 400% increase in threats to maritime ports around the world. You can go all the way back to NotPetya, right, and all that, right, in Ukraine, which is in the news, obviously very much today. And it all points to the impact of maritime ports as very critical to the U.S. economy and our global ability, but also force projection. We deliver a lot of our military goods and supplies when we have to project force around the world via ports. Tanks and food and fuel and all of those things are done through maritime ports in part. And maritime ports connect to rail systems and other surface mount transportation systems. So it's a very interconnected ecosystem. And if you look at any port, take a very close look. I'll give you an example. The port of Tampa in Florida, 70% of Florida's fuel comes through that port. Whenever there's a hurricane in Florida, and people wonder, why are we running out of gas? It's because all of those tanker ships have moved away from the coast of Florida, and all of those fuel trucks waiting to get refueled by those tanker ships don't have anything to wait for because the ships aren't coming in until the storm has passed. So things like Colonial Pipeline and the water plant attack in the Florida brought very, very keen attention to the fact that, whoa, wait a minute, our ports transport fuel. We offload, wastewater and other things, LNG gas. We aren't as prepared as we need to be for a cyber attack that could have the same or worse impact than a hurricane could.
The Hack the Port conference kicks off next week in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The CyberWire is a media partner. I'll be attending in person and hosting a session. You can learn more at hacktheport.tech. There's a lot more to this conversation. If you want to hear more, head on over to CyberWire Pro and sign up for Interview Selects, where you get access to this and many more extended interviews. And now, a word from our sponsor, LookingGlass Cyber, a global leader in cybersecurity. There's never been a more serious time for U.S. critical infrastructure sectors to shore up their cybersecurity defenses than right now. While ensuring internal cybersecurity solutions are blocking and detecting nefarious activities is critical, security leaders also need to understand their external attack surface. This outside-in view highlights the vulnerabilities and exposures that threat actors can see on your network. Gain a deeper understanding of vulnerabilities and exposures currently seen across the financial sector, along with a crosswalk of these items to Russian threat actors. Access your complimentary copy of the Financial Sector Cyber Profile at lookingglasscyber.com/cyberwire. And we thank Looking Glass Cyber for sponsoring our show. And joining me once again is Johannes Ullrich. He is the Dean of Research at the SANS Technology Institute and also the host of the ISC Stormcast podcast. Johannes, it's always great to have you back. You know, I think the message has certainly got out there about backups. You know, ransomware has been top of mind for so many people that I suspect there are a few who are out there who aren't doing regular backups. But there's a little more to it than that, as you wanted to point out today.
Yeah, so backups are important. They're often sort of considered your last line of defense when it comes to ransomware. But keep in mind, backup, it's complex, it's boring. So a lot of people don't really pay a lot of attention to it. So in addition to just testing that your backups are working, keep an eye on your backup software because one trend that I've seen sort of last year is that there are really a lot of vulnerabilities in backup software. And if you think about it, the vulnerability can be either in whatever central platform used to manage your backups. It may be in the agents that you need to deploy on systems in order to create these backups. All of these components have vulnerabilities. They usually run with elevated privileges because they need to have access to all of your files on the system. And I think it's a little bit that, not to have too much a Star Trek reference, but the undiscovered country of how attackers may get into your system. So in addition to attackers outright wiping out backups, we have seen that, of course, quite a few times, they may actually use your backup software as an entry point into your network.
I mean, it's not just the management software. I mean, you should be checking up on the hardware too, right? I mean, I'm thinking about like, Synology systems, things like that.
Yeah, these network accessible disk platform storage systems, Synology, you mentioned QNAP, they have a rich history of vulnerabilities themselves. They often have been already used as an entry point. Like there was this Synolocker, and lately, I forgot what it was called, the QNAP was affected by some ransomware software. So these platforms are part of it, part of the problem. And the software, like recently IBM Spectrum Protect, they're usually used to update like containers, to back up containers. They had some critical vulnerabilities. Kaseya, Unitrends, they had, I think back in December, vulnerabilities. It's hardly a month goes by without one or two sort of really critical vulnerabilities in that kind of software.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's worth noting that you putting that on your schedule. The care and maintenance of your backups includes checking to make sure that you can actually restore from them, but also add to that list that they're up to date.
Yeah, and always remember, once a month, delete a file and ask your sysadmins to recover it and see if it works. If you don't do that, it will not work once you actually need it. I ran myself in this a few times. So
Yeah, no, count on it, right?
Oh, and before you delete that file, make your own backup of it.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Right. Take it home, store it under the steps in the attic or whatever.
Burn it out.
Right, yeah. All right, Johannes Ullrich, thanks for joining us. This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by Trellix. Security threats are evolving, but so is your company. Bring your security to life. Learn more at Trellix.com. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. Be sure to check out this weekend's Research Saturday. My conversation is with Nathan Brubaker from Mandiant. We're discussing their research. 1 in 7 ransomware extortion attacks leak critical operational technology information. That's Research Saturday. Check it out. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Liz Irvin, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karpf, Eliana White, Peru Prakash, Justin Saby, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week. And now, a word from our sponsor, Code 42. The remote hybrid workforce is here to stay in some form or another. Wherever companies land on this, cloud apps are the common denominator, the engine that now powers the modern hybrid remote workforce. But these cloud super tools have their own kryptonite, the same capabilities that empower employees to connect, create, and collaborate faster and easier also make it faster and easier to exfiltrate data, intentionally or unintentionally. In fact, recent data from Code 42 shows that removable media like thumb drives is trending down as an exfiltration vector, while cloud exfiltration is skyrocketing, up 51% just since Q3 2021. Code 42 predicts that exfiltration via cloud services will become the exfiltration vector of choice in early 2022. The best way to combat this is with an insider risk management approach. Learn more about Code 42 and its SaaS solution for insider risk management at code42.com/showme. And we thank Code 42 for sponsoring our show.